Hey everybody, snarky solar guy here. I know I usually don't call myself that, but I need to start doing some branding. I've been wanting to do this video for a long time, and it's on qualified personnel as defined by the National Electric Code, NEC, NFPA 1, or NFPA 70, whatever. And I'm very familiar with this term, not because I've been in this industry for 16 years plus, but because I spent my entire life as a young man going through the U.S. Navy as a submarine sonar tech, being bombarded by this term qualified personnel, right? And from the day I went into the Navy, I was qualifying something, right? And had to qualify being a sonarman, right? Had to qualify being a sonar supervisor, had to qualify all these other watch stations on a submarine, because you can't just take somebody and throw them in and expect them to know what to do, especially when there's safety of ship involved and safety and security of the sub, right? And of your fellow shipmates, right? It was probably the most important thing. And so until the very day on my last submarine, after 20 years, I was still qualifying something. Diving officer of the watch. And you would think after being at sea for 5 years, when you go to shore duty, it's like, okay, well, I can take a breath now and enjoy some of this Hawaii weather. Nope. Oh, you're on shore duty now? Hey, you get to qualify master training specialist. So it never ended, right? And it wasn't that you got this piece of paper signed off and you got grilled by your peers. No, you had inspections that came along, right? And so you were graded and judged on your inspections. And there were some that were so serious that if you failed, they would literally take the keys away from your submarine. Like, you could not go to sea anymore, which back then maybe wasn't such a bad idea, but not good for the command or the command climate for sure. So, okay, Greg, are we going to talk about sea stories here? No, we're actually going to relate that qualified personnel back to our industry here, solar industry, and what that means, right? And so the guiding doctrine for the solar industry is a National Electric Code. Right? When I say solar industry, I don't mean just like the modules that are up on the roof, right? Like those, that's the most boring part of the whole thing, right? They get the most play, everybody wants to talk about them, but they're just these things of glass and solar cells up there. Maybe you get 20% efficiency out of them, but they just sit up there for 20 years cranking away. But you have all this other peripheral stuff that goes along with that, right? So you got the inverters, you got, if you want to expand and get batteries, well, now you got to, talk about that. You've got the rails up on the roof and the racking, and so balance of systems, right? Panels, electrical switches, and things like that. And so if one of those pieces fails, then the entire system suffers. And it's a big deal, right? If you don't mount the rails on the roof good enough, you get a leaky roof. If you don't mount the modules good enough, well, they crack, or worse, they may start a fire. You don't install the inverter well enough, well, you suffer production, or you get an electrical fire from that, right? Same thing with batteries. And so you have all of these things that work together in these systems. And all of these systems are supposed to be installed by qualified personnel as defined by the National Electric Code, right? So I'm not going to bore you with code. That's why we have people like Ryan Mayfield. Not that he's going to bore you with code, but Ryan, who works at Mayfield Renewables, the founder, he has classes on these things. Like, he talks about code, and he has workshops. Matter of fact, I would highly recommend you jumping into one of his workshops if you just want to get the down and dirty overall view of what's going on with the code. Like, your brain will hurt after those sessions, but in a good way, I promise you. And you're like, well, what does all that have to do? Like, what's the plug for? Well, because the National Electric Code defines a qualified personnel as having these 4 characteristics. Okay, number 1, they have to have electrical knowledge. They have to understand what all these mean. I call them trons, electronics, right? And they have to know what trons do. They have to have safety training, bare minimum, OSHA 10, right? That's a 10-hour course that gives you training on personal protective equipment, or PPE, E, and how to use tools safely. Then number 3, you have the ability to understand this equipment that you're working on or installing. And then the last part, you have to have the ability to comply with all of these National Electric Code articles or directives or rules, whatever you want to call them. Right? So all of that is important because right now our industry is suffering on 2 fronts, okay, in my opinion. We're suffering on the sales front because of unscrupulous installers who are taking advantage of this solar boom, and they're preying on homeowners, right? And they are predatory, make no mistake. And this is the time of year when you're going to see them. All those kids coming to your door, knocking, hey, we'll sell you solar, 0 money down. It ain't always that good. And so this is the time of year. They're going to come knocking on your door. They're going to ask you if you want solar. Not all of them are bad, but in my experience, I just wouldn't. Because they're sales organizations. Okay, typically the big ones or even the little ones, they don't give a shit about you. Okay, they're out there to make money, and they do that by really gouging in those margins. I'm saying not making money is wrong, but the way they make money, I just don't like it. Okay, so we have that going on, and I am so close to making a site because people are begging for this. If you do an internet search, you'll find people that are begging our industry to have some kind of resource to figure out who the good companies are, right? And so that leads into the next front of this battle, if you want to call it, and it's installation companies that are just doing really bad work, right? I just don't know what else to say it without being really mean about it. Man. They're not doing good work. They're not hiring qualified personnel. We'll bring it around. And I know this because even the company that I work for, we have people that are using our stuff, installers, installation companies, and they don't know what they're doing. And I've been harping on this for years. RTFM, read the fun manual, right? I'd be happy if people did that. Okay? 30% of the calls that I get into our service line can be easily answered if they just read our documentation. Okay? A significant number of service calls that relate in damaged equipment come from the installers not knowing what they're doing. They don't even read the documentation that comes with it. And I know this to be true because we have installers that do stupid shit like this where, and if anybody knows inverters well enough, you know that the left side is generally the DC side. That's where all the PV comes in. The right side is the AC. That's where the grid comes in. So you look at this, you're like, well, that's a DC problem for sure. And it sure is. This installer, and I use that term loosely here, whoever wired this inverter, instead of putting all the negatives in one terminal and all the positives in the other set of terminals, they just went positive, negative in the same terminal. And this is what happened. Okay? And to make matters worse, they sent us a video of somebody holding a drill poking these wires as they were arcing and sparking and still had flames on them. That does not sound like a qualified person to me. And I've got buddies in this industry that have been here as long or longer than me, and they all have horror stories. Matter of fact, I have a few of them that make a very good living going back and working on and helping homeowners with orphan systems from these shyster installation companies that were only around for 3 to 5 years. They didn't give a shit about the installers. They just wanted to make their money and bounce. And I'm sure we can all think of a few names right off the top of our head. Yeah. So it's like, okay, Greg, well, you're bitching about all this, and so what do we do? Right? And so I found out a long time ago that you cannot, pretty please with sugar on top, your way into compliance, because people just aren't going to do it. They're not going to. Yeah, you have to incentivize them, or you have to punish them. Okay? Those are really the only two options. And the incentives vary. Like, I don't think incentivizing somebody by giving them discounts or whatever to do their job correctly is the right way to go. Unfortunately, we can't rely on inspectors to do the right thing or to even get and I'm sure they're shorthanded. I'm not bagging on inspectors, but I've seen many installs that if somebody would have just gone up there and spent the slightest amount of time, they would have found error. Like, look at this grounding issue. Okay, rust on there, we know what that means, dissimilar metals. And look at what they did to this ground wire. They didn't even try. That could have been caught by an inspector. So I don't know. Like, I think it's going to get to the point where if we don't clean up our act, and if we don't police, and if we don't call people out, then it's only going to get worse. Like, we have a public perception issue right now. We're trying to dig ourselves out of it on the sales side and on the installation side. And so that is part of the reason that I wrote my book, The Battery Powered Home. It was to help primarily people who are new to this industry, generally focusing on the installers, but it has kind of morphed into an end user resource. And I've been doing, like I said, 16 going on 17 years, and I hate talking to homeowners. I really do. DIYers, preppers, off-gridders, like whatever the floating definition is, or the person that calls in to the vendor, to the manufacturer of the equipment. I don't like talking to them because they don't fall into any of these categories defined by the National Electric Code as being a qualified person. And I love the people. I've been an engineer for 40 years. Yeah, those are the ones that usually jack this up. Okay, being an engineer doesn't mean anything to me. Okay, I'm a aeronautical engineer. That doesn't mean you know how to fly an airplane. Okay, I was an electrical engineer. That doesn't mean you know how to wire up an inverter. It doesn't. Now, generally speaking, however, the end user, the DIYers, they do read the manuals. At least they do that, right? And in my experience, they do that because they have no idea, and so they're just trying to get some information, which is more than I can say for a lot of installers out there. Like, they don't even read a tag on some of the equipment that my company sells that shows them how to correctly install these things. Like, they just don't even, they rip it off, they throw it right in the corner. All right? And part of that may be because the person that is on site probably doesn't even speak English. Like, that's just the reality of the world that we live in. Cheap labor gives you more margin. Yeah? And so you got a bunch of people that don't speak English, except maybe one person on site, and he's got to run around and show everybody how to do it. And then you end up with things that don't go right. So until we get, and I hate this, I hate when we have to have an overlook, right? Or somebody that has to like watch everything that we do, right? I hated that when I was on the boat. Like, we would have inspections, like yearly inspections, big deals, right? Tactical readiness exam. That was the one where everybody forward of the watertight door. We were just dogged 3 days straight, no sleep, drilling all the time. It was just bad. Then the nukes had their own inspection every year, right? And you got some weenie that's like right behind you watching everything you do as he's going through this checklist, right? If you miss one thing, you spend the next 3 hours in the wardroom going over a critique on why this guy did this instead of that, right? And so I hate that kind of oversight. But if we don't fix our industry, it may get to that point with us. It may get there. And so back to plugging my book, right? I wrote this for installers so they could get this, you know, not even a baseline knowledge. Like I go pretty deep into this stuff. But my website, my author's site, snarkysolarguy.com, is getting a lot of play from homeowners. Like I'm popping up in search engines and I'm getting questions. Hey man, I got a guy, a 3.5 kilowatt solar system, and this person was going to be charged $15,000. So I told this person, you may want to get a second opinion, and like slam the door in that guy's face. That's ridiculous. Okay, I got a 5K system here in California for way less than that. Like, I hate using this metric. I think it's stupid. But $2.80 a watt, that was 4 years ago. Yeah. So I give everybody a lot of information to protect themselves. Like there is a lot of consumer education in this book. And I went into a lot of detail. I put a lot of experience into this. It is for grid-tied because off-grid is a completely different animal. But I would say 85%, 90% of what's in this book will apply to off-grid. I just don't get as nasty in some of my design guidelines rather for off-grid, but that's it. Yeah. So if you're an installer watching this, like beef up your game, man. Like beef it up. You will do better in the long run if you do good sales and service, even though you may be higher priced, right? Like a B Corp or an employee-owned company has more invested. They have more risk involved in their company. So they're going to do a better job. That's just how it is. Don't rely on Yelp to figure out a good installer near you, because all they got to do is pay some company to write a bunch of fake reviews. Okay, Google reviews is probably a little better, but Yelp is a joke, right? And word of mouth is probably the best thing. All right, so if you want to arm yourself, if you want to know way more than those goobers that come knocking on your door and the salesperson they refer you to, read my book. You will run circles around them. I wrote this book in plain English, not engineering speak. I have a glossary. I tell you everything you need to know. Okay? That's why I wrote this book, because I just got fed up. And so I had this resource out there for you. Matter of fact, I'm looking at getting it translated into Spanish. A buddy of mine, Rudy Saporite, who sponsors my book for the last 2 years at the NABCEP conference, has talked to me about that. And that's, matter of fact, that's one thing. Ask the installation company if they have a NABCEP certified person or 4 in the group, right? And a lot of them have like a C10, which is an electrician, contractor, or a C46, but they may only have one person that is certified, that electrical and the solar specific contractor. And so they may have somebody else wire everything up that may not know what they're doing, and then it's on this other qualified person to come out there and review everything before they turn it on. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it don't. So anyway, that's the plug for qualified personnel, right? If you are an installer, get your crew certified. If you're a homeowner, make sure you're asking these tough questions about the installation company you're talking to. So, love to hear your thoughts. Put them down in the comment section. We can all benefit from that. And thanks for watching. See ya.